They said the storm would sweep everything away by the next morning. But a Navy SEAL heard a sound the wind couldn't mask. Under a frozen pine tree, a German Shepherd puppy hung suspended, left to die. Beside it, a young woman lay unconscious in the snow, her hand still reaching out to the dog. What happened next not only saved many lives, it changed the very meaning of survival. Before we begin, please let me know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below. Snow drove sideways through the Montana highlands, thick and relentless, erasing distance and sound until the world narrowed to wind, headlights, and the long groan of pine branches bending under winter's weight. Ethan Walker eased his truck along the forest road with both hands steady on the wheel, posture locked into a discipline that had outlived its usefulness. He was 34, lean and sharply built, shoulders squared by years of combat loadouts. His face was all angles, high cheekbones, a straight nose once broken and set imperfectly, a firm jaw shadowed by short, dark stubble. Steel-colored eyes stayed alert even when exhaustion pulled at them. He spoke little to strangers, kept distance with friends, and trusted routine more than comfort. A mission months earlier, one that ended with a withdrawal order he obeyed, and a K-9 that didn't come home, had hollowed something in him, leaving behind a preference for solitude and motion over sleep. The blizzard thickened without warning. Wind slammed the truck broadside, testing traction and patience. Ethan slowed, telling himself it was for visibility, for safety, for common sense. He didn't admit that stillness lately felt dangerous, that when the vehicle stopped, his thoughts surged. He scanned the tree line automatically, habits refusing to loosen their grip. Pines rose like sentries, their trunks black against the white. Then a sound slipped through the storm, thin, irregular, not wind and not snow. A broken whimper, barely there. His foot hit the brake before his mind finished naming it. He stepped into knee-deep snow, boots finding purchase by memory. The cold bit through layers, sharp and intimate. The sound came again, weaker, pulling him downhill toward a cluster of tall pines near a shallow ravine. Ethan moved with controlled urgency, knife already in his hand, not in expectation of threat, but because empty hands felt wrong. Years of training narrowed his focus, panic filtered out, leaving only purpose. Whatever made that sound was alive. Alive meant unfinished. Beneath the largest pine, the storm revealed its cruelty. A German Shepherd puppy hung awkwardly from a rough rope looped around his small chest and belly. Not his neck, the knot tied hastily, fibers frayed as if cut from impatience. His hind paws scraped the frozen ground, claws etching thin lines in the snow as his body trembled. He was no more than 4 or 5 months old, frame narrow, paws oversized, ribs faintly visible beneath thick black and tan fur stiff with ice. One ear struggled upright while the other folded forward, giving him an earnest, unfinished look. Amber eyes, dulled by cold and fear, locked onto Ethan's with a focus that felt like a plea rather than panic. The puppy wasn't choking. He was simply too small, too tired, too cold to hold himself up any longer. Ethan's breath hitched despite his control. He had seen bodies caught between endurance and surrender before. Men and dogs waiting for a decision they could not make themselves. He took a step closer, assessing quickly, cataloging risk. The rope held him low. The ground saved him from worse. There was time, but not much. Ethan raised the knife, then stopped when something else came into view. A few feet from the tree, half buried in drifting snow, a young woman lay motionless on her side. Up close, she looked tall and spare, long-limbed even in collapse. Her build suggested stamina rather than fragility. Dark brown hair spilled from beneath a knit hat, strands frozen into stiff arcs against pale skin burned raw by wind. Her face was narrow, cheekbones pronounced, lips faintly blue. One gloved hand lay outstretched toward the pine, fingers curled as if she had reached for the puppy and lost consciousness mid-motion. Snow dusted her lashes. The stillness around her felt dangerous. Ethan knelt, pressing 2 fingers to her neck, counting with quiet intensity. A pulse, slow, weak, but there. He leaned closer, watching her chest for movement, measuring breath by fog that barely formed in the air. Hypothermia likely. Exhaustion certainly. No obvious trauma. He studied her clothing. Practical boots worn thin at the soles, a coat mended at the elbow, gloves patched more than once. This wasn't carelessness. This was someone used to long days, to responsibility, to enduring without complaint. He would learn her name later, but already he sensed her temperament, reserved, resilient, the kind of woman who took care of others until there was nothing left for herself. Time compressed. The wind rose. Snow erased his tracks almost as quickly as he made them. Ethan stood between the puppy and the woman, the choice sharp and immediate. His mind flashed to another night, another terrain, dust instead of snow, rotor wash instead of wind, a handler shouting a name over gunfire, orders crackling in his headset, pull back, mission first. He remembered obeying, remembered living with it. The memory tightened his jaw until his teeth ached. This time, he said aloud, voice low and steady, meant for himself as much as the storm. This time, nobody gets left. He moved fast. One clean pull of the blade and the rope parted. Fibers snapped. The puppy dropped into his arms with a startled sound, all bone and shuddering muscle. Ethan pulled the small body inside his jacket, pressing him against bare warmth, feeling the frantic heartbeat begin to slow. The dog didn't fight. He leaned in, trusting with a desperation that carried weight. Ethan adjusted his grip to keep the airway clear, tucking the puppy close, sharing heat without ceremony. He turned back to the woman, shrugging out of his spare jacket and wrapping it around her head and torso, insulating her the way he had been taught under worse conditions. His hands were steady. His chest was not. He positioned her carefully, checking again for breath, for pulse, for any sign of change. She made a faint sound, half breath, half protest, and then stilled. Ethan noted it, a small victory measured in degrees rather than miles. Snow thickened. The forest pressed in. Ethan lifted his head, gauging distance to the road, calculating weight and time. He could carry both, awkward and slow, but possible. He slid one arm beneath the woman's shoulders, testing leverage, balancing her weight, while keeping the puppy secure against his chest. The combined burden settled into his muscles, heavier not because of mass but because of meaning. He set his stance, found balance, and rose. Each step back toward the road felt longer than the last. Wind cut through seams. Snow filled his boots. He kept moving anyway, eyes scanning, senses tuned. The puppy shifted, nose pressing into his chest, warmth shared and rationed. The woman's head lolled slightly with motion, breath shallow but present. Ethan counted breaths, hers, the puppy's, his own, measuring time and heartbeats. When the road finally emerged from the white, it felt less like relief than permission to continue. Ethan paused for a fraction of a second, looking down at the 2 lives he carried. He understood with absolute clarity that if he had driven another 100 yards, if the storm had swallowed that sound, there would have been nothing left to find but snow and regret. He turned toward the truck, resolve settling clean and cold. The mountains had offered him a choice. He had answered without hesitation. The storm did not ease when Ethan Walker turned away from the pine. It seemed to grow more intent, as if the mountains themselves were testing whether his decision would hold under pressure. Snow thickened, wind clawed at his face, and the dark closed in with a patience that felt almost intelligent. He adjusted his stance, grounding himself, the German Shepherd puppy secured inside his jacket, its small body pressed tight against his chest, warmth shared without ceremony. The puppy was still trembling, muscles fluttering beneath coarse fur, but the frantic edge had dulled. Each breath was shallow yet stubborn, a quiet insistence on staying. Ethan felt that insistence echo somewhere deep inside him. He turned back to the woman lying in the snow. Up close, her condition looked worse than it had at a distance. Hypothermia had stolen color from her skin, leaving it pale and almost translucent, veins faintly visible along her temples and wrists. She was tall and slim, her frame spare rather than fragile, with long limbs that suggested strength earned through endurance rather than ease. Dark brown hair, thick and slightly wavy, clung damply to her face where snow had melted against lingering warmth. Her features were sharp but not hard, high cheekbones, a straight nose reddened by cold, lips tinged blue. She looked like someone accustomed to responsibility, the kind of woman who kept moving even when exhaustion argued otherwise. Ethan noted the details automatically, the way he always did, reading bodies like terrain. He knelt, knife still in hand, and checked her pulse again, slower now, but present. He leaned close to her mouth, watching for the faintest movement of air. Breath came, thin and irregular, like something easily lost. He spoke to her, even though he knew she could not answer. His voice was low, steady, the tone he once used over radios when chaos threatened to swallow clarity. "Stay with me," he said. "You're not done yet." The words were as much for him as for her. He had said similar things before, to men pinned under fire, to dogs bleeding out on foreign ground. Sometimes they worked, sometimes they didn't. What mattered was saying them anyway. Memory pressed in, uninvited. Another night, another weatherless darkness, the sound of gunfire instead of wind. He saw the K9 again, a full-grown German Shepherd with disciplined eyes and a handler who trusted Ethan without question. The order to pull back had come clean and final, stripped of emotion. He had obeyed. Survival demanded it. The reports later had called it unavoidable. Ethan had called it a failure he lived with every day. That failure had shaped him more than any medal or citation. It had made him quieter, harder to reach, less willing to believe in outcomes he couldn't personally secure. He shook the thought loose and focused on the present, one decision at a time. He shrugged out of his spare jacket and wrapped it around the woman, insulating her head and torso, making sure nothing restricted her breathing. He positioned her on her side, elevating her legs slightly with packed snow and a folded scarf he found in her pocket. The scarf was wool, hand-knitted, the kind made by someone who understood winter intimately. He noted it, another quiet clue to who she was, someone prepared, someone who hadn't planned to be abandoned. The puppy shifted inside his jacket, nose pushing weakly against Ethan's chest, as if checking whether this new shelter was real. Ethan tightened his arm protectively, adjusting the puppy's position to keep the airway clear. The dog let out a small sound, not a bark, more a breath with intent, and then settled again. His ears twitched at the wind. Even in wakeness, instinct remained. Ethan respected that. He had trusted instinct once and lost. He trusted it now and refused to lose again. The distance to the road wasn't far, but the terrain made it cruel. Snow drifted deep in places, crusted hard in others. Each step required calculation. Ethan tested his footing, then slid one arm beneath the woman's shoulders and back, lifting her carefully. She weighed less than he expected, a dangerous sign, but he compensated, shifting her against his side, using his body as a shield against the wind. He could feel her breath against his collarbone, faint but warming. The puppy's heat pressed into his chest. Two fragile rhythms, both depending on his balance. Moving uphill against the wind burned his legs and shoulders. Snow filled his boots, melted, then refroze at the edges. His breath came hard and controlled, paced the way he had learned on forced marches. He scanned constantly, senses tuned despite fatigue, noting tree spacing, slope angle, the way snow collected along depressions. Training refused to switch off. It never did. He welcomed that now. Habit was a kind of faith. As he moved, he studied the woman in brief glances. Her face tightened occasionally, brows drawing together as if some part of her registered pain or cold, even in unconsciousness. Her hands were roughened at the palms, calloused in a way that spoke of work rather than ornament. Teacher, he guessed, or caretaker of some kind? Someone used to giving. He wondered who had left her here, what fear or selfishness had justified that choice. Anger rose, sharp and immediate, but he forced it down. Rage spent energy he needed elsewhere. Accountability could come later. Survival came first. The road appeared gradually, a darker ribbon beneath snow, almost indistinguishable from the forest until he was nearly upon it. Ethan paused for a breath, steadying himself, then angled toward his truck. He set the woman gently against the passenger door, opened it, and eased her inside, arranging her on the seat so her airway remained clear. He cranked the heat to its highest setting, watching color slowly begin to return to her cheeks. He climbed in after her, careful with the puppy, and closed the door against the storm. Inside the cab, the sudden warmth felt shocking. The puppy let out a soft, surprised sound and shifted, breathing hitching once before easing. Ethan kept him wrapped close, rubbing gently through the jacket, feeling the small heart hammer, and then slow. He adjusted the woman's blankets, checked her pulse again, and watched her chest rise and fall. Still alive. Still here. He allowed himself a fraction of relief, nothing more. He turned the truck around, tires grinding, headlights cutting narrow tunnels through white. As the engine pulled them forward, Ethan felt the weight of the past loosen slightly, not gone, but answered. He had made a different choice this time. That mattered, even if the night wasn't finished with them yet. The cabin lay ahead, a mile off the service road, tucked into the trees where wind lost some of its fury. It had belonged to a teammate once, a man who had dreamed of disappearing into quiet after service. The man never made it that far. Ethan had inherited the cabin without ceremony, a responsibility wrapped in memory. The puppy lifted his head, one amber eye opening to study Ethan's face. There was no fear there, only confusion edged with reliance. Ethan met the gaze briefly. He didn't smile. He wasn't ready for that. But something steadied in his chest. He spoke quietly, words chosen with care. "I've got you," he said. Not a promise, a statement of fact meant to be upheld. As the truck climbed toward the trees, the storm continued its assault, but inside the cab, 3 lives shared warmth and direction. Ethan kept his eyes on the road, jaw set, mind clear. Whatever waited at the cabin, silence, memories, consequences, he would face it. He had already crossed the hardest line. He had turned back for those the world had decided were expendable. And this time he was carrying everyone out. The cabin stood low and weather-worn among the trees, its dark timber pressed inward by years of snow and wind, a structure built to endure rather than welcome. Ethan Walker killed the engine and let the sudden quiet settle, a silence so complete it rang in his ears. He lifted Sarah first, careful with her neck and shoulders, then returned for the German Shepherd puppy, whose small body remained tucked inside his jacket, breathing shallow but steady. The cold bit immediately as the truck door opened, but the cabin was only a few steps away, and Ethan moved with the economy of someone who had learned to measure effort against outcome. Inside, the air was frigid and smelled of pine resin, old smoke, and iron. The cabin was sparse but functional, a narrow couch against the far wall, a rough-hewn table scarred by use, 2 chairs that didn't quite match, and a stone fireplace choked with cold ash. This place had been built by a man who believed in usefulness over comfort, a belief Ethan understood well. He laid Sarah gently on the couch, positioning her on her side, elevating her legs slightly with a folded blanket. Up close, the damage the storm had done was clearer. Her skin was pale and dry, windburned along the cheekbones and nose, lips cracked from cold. She was tall and slim, her frame wiry rather than fragile, the kind shaped by walking long distances and carrying weight without complaint. Her dark brown hair, thick and slightly wavy, had slipped free of its tie and fell across her face. Even unconscious, there was a tension in her brow that suggested persistence, a woman who pushed herself beyond safe limits because others depended on her. Ethan turned to the puppy next, setting him carefully on a blanket near the hearth. In the lantern light, the dog looked impossibly young, 4 or 5 months at most. His black and tan coat was dense but still soft, clumped with melted snow and dirt. His ribs showed faintly when he breathed, a sign of missed meals or hurried abandonment. One ear stood upright while the other folded forward, giving him an earnest, almost questioning look. His amber eyes tracked Ethan's movements with intense focus, not fear but vigilance, as if imprinting on the first thing that had not failed him. Ethan struck a match and coaxed a fire to life, hands steady, movements precise. The puppy flinched once at the sound, then settled as warmth began to spread. As the fire caught, Sarah stirred. Her lashes fluttered, eyes opening briefly before drifting again. Ethan was at her side immediately, his presence controlled, non-invasive. "You're inside," he said quietly, voice low and even. "Fire's going. Just breathe." His tone was not soothing so much as factual, the way he spoke to people when emotion threatened to overwhelm clarity. Her eyes focused for a second, dark and alert beneath exhaustion, then slid toward the puppy. Relief softened her expression before fatigue reclaimed it. She slept again, breath uneven but stronger. Minutes stretched into an hour. The storm hammered the roof and windows, but inside the cabin, warmth took hold. Ethan fed the fire, then checked Sarah's pulse and temperature, repeating the cycle until it became rhythm. When she woke more fully, she introduced herself as Sarah Miller. Her voice was quiet but firm, carrying the cadence of someone used to classrooms rather than crowds. She explained in short sentences that she worked as a volunteer teacher in a mountain town farther north, that she had been helping a family relocate when the storm trapped her on the road. The man who offered her a ride panicked when conditions worsened. He tied the puppy to the tree so it wouldn't follow and left when Sarah collapsed. She didn't speak with anger, just fact. That restraint told Ethan more than rage ever could. Night settled hard and complete. The fire popped softly. Wind found every crack. Ethan sat on the floor near the hearth, back against the wall, boots still on. The puppy curled against his leg, pressing close for warmth. Sarah slept on the couch, breath steady now, color slowly returning to her cheeks. Everything that needed doing had been done. That was when the silence grew heavy. It began as pressure in Ethan's chest, subtle and insistent. The wind shifted pitch, becoming rotor wash in his mind. The snap of burning wood sharpened into distant gunfire. His shoulders tightened, his hands curled into fists without permission. He tried grounding himself, counting breaths, naming objects. But memory surged harder. He was back in a ravine overseas, dust in his mouth, radio screaming conflicting orders. He saw the K-9 again, full-grown and disciplined, dropping under fire while his handler shouted the dog's name. He remembered freezing for a fraction of a second, then obeying the order to pull back. He remembered the report later, clean language erasing the cost. Acceptable loss, necessary decision. His breathing went shallow, vision tunneled. He felt the familiar slide toward panic, the body remembering before the mind could intervene. Then the puppy moved. Despite his weakness, the dog struggled upright, nails clicking softly against the floor as he dragged himself closer. He pressed his small body against Ethan's shin, warm and solid, breath fast but steady. The contact cut through the spiral. Ethan dropped one hand instinctively, fingers sinking into thick fur. He focused on texture, on heat, on the undeniable proof of life beneath his palm. Slowly, painfully, his breathing matched the puppy's. Sarah stirred at the sound. She did not speak or move closer. She watched from the couch, eyes clear now, taking in the rigid posture, the shaking hand, the way Ethan's jaw clenched and then eased. She recognized the signs of a man fighting something invisible and familiar. When Ethan finally looked up, their eyes met briefly. No questions, no explanations, just understanding. The storm raged on through the night, but inside the cabin, something fragile held. Ethan fed the fire, offered Sarah warm water when she woke, and checked the puppy's breathing until it steadied. She asked about the dog. Ethan admitted he didn't know his name. Sarah studied the puppy's earnest face, the mismatched ears, the way he leaned instinctively toward Ethan. "He looks like a buddy," she said quietly. The words settled easily. The puppy's tail thumped once against the blanket. Ethan nodded. "Buddy?" he repeated, testing the sound. It felt right. Near dawn the wind eased. Snow still fell, but lighter now, less intent. Ethan remained awake, leaning against the wall, Buddy curled against his side, Sarah resting more peacefully. The cabin felt less like shelter and more like a threshold, a place between what had nearly been lost and what might still be saved. Ethan stared into the embers and understood that bringing them here had not ended anything. It had begun something he could no longer step away from. He accepted that without certainty, only resolve. Morning arrived thin and pale, the storm retreating into higher ridges as if exhausted by its own persistence, leaving behind a silence that felt provisional rather than peaceful. Ethan Walker drove slowly down the mountain road, both hands steady on the wheel, eyes scanning the shoulders where snow had drifted into deceptive shelves. The German shepherd puppy lay on a thick blanket in the back seat, bandaged and wrapped, breathing steadier now, amber eyes tracking movement with a cautious intelligence. Sarah sat upright in the passenger seat, shoulders squared despite lingering weakness. In daylight, her features resolved clearly, tall and slim, long-limbed, with dark brown hair pulled back in a simple tie. Her skin, pale and wind-burned, carried the marks of a night survived rather than a life avoided. She moved with deliberate care, conserving strength, the posture of a woman used to responsibility rather than rescue. The veterinary clinic sat at the edge of town, a low building with a faded red roof and windows fogged by warmth inside. When the door opened, the scent of disinfectant and damp fur replaced the mountain air. Dr. Claire Halverson met them with a glance that missed nothing. She was in her late 50s, broad-shouldered, iron-gray hair cropped short, hands thickened by work and scarred by years of animals that didn't trust easily. Her face held lines carved by hard truths rather than softness. Her manner was calm, precise, unflinching. She knelt to the puppy's level without crowding, letting him decide the distance. He did not pull back. That fact alone told her much. On the exam table, the puppy endured with a stillness that surprised everyone but Ethan. Claire traced the rope burns along the chest and belly, checked joints, listened to the heart, and examined the gums. "This isn't aggression," she said quietly, voice level. "This is fear taught too early and trust interrupted." She spoke plainly about exposure, missed meals, and the kind of abandonment that breaks rhythm before it breaks bone. She cleaned and dressed the wounds with practiced care, explaining that time, warmth, and consistency would do more than force ever could. The puppy watched her hands, ears mismatched and attentive, then shifted his gaze back to Ethan as if confirming alignment. Claire noticed. She always did. Paperwork finished, instructions given, rest, warmth, no stress, they stepped back into the cold. The town moved slowly around them, unaware of the small decision that had just been corrected inside a warm room. Sarah exhaled, relief visible in the easing of her shoulders. Ethan helped the puppy back into the truck, settling him carefully. He caught his reflection in the rearview mirror and looked away, unwilling to name the sense of rightness settling where guilt had lived. The drive back toward the mountains was uneventful until it wasn't. A dull, muffled crack rolled through the trees like distant thunder. Ethan braked instinctively, pulling to the shoulder as a narrow chute above the road gave way. Snow and debris spilled downslope, heavy and sudden, settling into a basin below. A sedan sat half-buried at the edge, rear lights blinking weakly through powder. Wind carried a thin human sound, fragile and urgent. Sarah's breath caught. Ethan was already moving. The puppy rose before being told, pain forgotten, nose lifting to read the air. He whined once, low, not panic, then leapt from the truck into the drift. Ethan followed, boots sinking, breath burning. He scanned for secondary slide risk, assigning tasks without needing an audience. Sarah stayed back, calling emergency services with steady clarity, her voice carrying coordinates and conditions. She sounded like herself again, composed, precise, present. The puppy cut left, then stopped abruptly, tail rigid. He pawed once and looked back. Ethan dropped to his knees and dug where the puppy indicated. Snow, dense and cold, every scoop a fight. A small pocket opened, a child's sleeve appeared. He cleared the airway, wrapped a jacket around the boy, and passed him upslope. The puppy shifted, barking once, location, not alarm, and led Ethan a few feet farther. A girl came next, crying thinly but alive. The father lay last, shoulder pinned, breath shallow. Ethan stabilized him with the same economy he used under fire, speaking clearly, keeping the man awake until sirens cut through the trees. By the time responders arrived, the family was loaded and moved, hands clutching hands, shock giving way to tears. The puppy stood apart, chest heaving, a faint line of blood seeping at the edge of his bandage where he had pushed too hard. The mother found Ethan's sleeve with numb fingers. "That dog," she said, voice breaking. "He found him." Ethan nodded once, unable to trust his voice. He knelt, pressing his forehead briefly to the puppy's neck, grounding himself in heat and breath. Proof breathed beneath his hands. Back in town, word moved ahead of them. At the volunteer station, faces turned, then softened. Someone whispered. Someone else said it louder. The dog they found hanging. The dog that saved a family. Ethan felt the shift like pressure easing where judgment had once lived. Sarah stood beside him, quiet satisfaction in her eyes. Evidence did not always look like paperwork. Sometimes it stood, shook off snow, and waited. They returned to the cabin as dusk approached, light thinning into blue. Ethan cleaned the puppy's wound again, careful and sure. The dog endured without complaint, eyes fixed on Ethan's face, trust unforced. Sarah brewed tea and spoke softly about classrooms and mountain kids who learned resilience before multiplication. She was still tall and spare in movement, still careful with strength, but the guarded tightness had loosened. The cabin held them without comment. Headlights cut across the trees near nightfall, slowing too close. Ethan felt old alertness rise clean and cold. The puppy lifted his head, ears forward, body still. A man stepped onto the porch, mid-40s, broad through the chest, beard untrimmed, eyes set deep beneath a heavy brow. His coat hung open despite the cold. His boots were muddy with old snow. He did not knock at first. When he finally did, it was not a request. "That's my dog," he said, certainty thick in his voice. Ownership, not recognition. Ethan blocked the doorway with his body. "He's not going anywhere." The man scoffed, stepped forward, testing space. The puppy rose slowly and placed himself between them, posture firm, tail low, but steady. He did not bare teeth. He warned. The man sneered. "Unstable," as if reciting a diagnosis. The word tasted wrong. Sarah's voice came from behind, calm and precise, already on the line with the dispatcher she had learned to trust. Sirens grew, distant but closing. The man's bravado thinned. When deputies arrived, specifics mattered. Photos of rope burns, GPS points, witness statements from the slide. Cuffs clicked. The porch breathed again. After, the cabin felt different. Quieter, charged. Ethan closed the door gently and leaned his forehead against it, breath finally steady. The puppy pressed into his leg, warm and solid, choosing contact. Ethan knelt, resting his hands on the dog's shoulders, feeling the tremor fade. He understood what had changed. He had not retreated. He had not obeyed a bad order. He had stood where he once stepped back. Outside, the mountain settled. Inside, Proof breathed. Spring did not arrive all at once in the mountains. It came in concessions, in mornings that held a little more light, and nights that released their grip a little sooner, as if winter were learning how to let go without admitting defeat. Ethan Walker noticed the change first in the ground beneath his boots. Snow softened into slush, then into dark soil that breathed when the sun touched it. He moved through the days with a steadiness he hadn't felt in years, the sharp edge of vigilance easing into something usable rather than exhausting. The German shepherd puppy, now unmistakably Buddy, recovered with patient determination. At 5 months turning 6, He grew fast, his once visible ribs filling out beneath a thick black and tan coat. His mismatched ears settled, one fully upright, the other a little late to the conversation, giving him an alert, curious expression. His eyes stayed amber and intent, learning the world not with fear, but with measured interest. Sarah Miller chose to stay in town. The decision surprised no one who had watched her move through the days since the storm. She was tall and spare, shoulders relaxed now, dark brown hair often tied back with practical care. Her skin, once pale and wind-burned, warmed back into color. She returned to teaching, first part-time, then fully, bringing with her the same quiet authority she carried in the cabin. Children listened when she spoke. Adults did too. She had a way of standing still and letting the room find its center around her. The mountains had tested her, and she had answered without spectacle. Ethan took Buddy back to the clinic weekly. Dr. Claire Halverson watched the progress with a professional satisfaction that never crossed into sentiment. She noted muscle gain, improved gait, a calmer baseline. Consistency, she said, as if naming a law of physics. Buddy greeted her without anxiety, tail level, posture balanced. Trust, once interrupted, was rebuilding on its own terms. Ethan understood that better than most. The call came on a clear morning when snowmelt traced silver lines down the slopes. Lieutenant Mark Harris waited on the other end of the line. He was compact, early 40s, hair clipped close, face marked by years of command, and a habit of listening before deciding. Harris had been shaped by data and loss in equal measure. A training accident years earlier had taught him the cost of rushing conclusions. He spoke plainly. There was a pilot program forming, operators carrying unresolved combat stress paired with rehabilitated canines for advanced search and support roles. Not therapy dressed as duty, not duty pretending to be therapy. Structure with purpose? Harris had read Ethan's file. He had read between the lines. Ethan listened without interrupting, standing on the porch while Buddy sat at his side, weight balanced, eyes forward. When the line went quiet, Ethan closed his eyes briefly. The canyon memory surfaced, then receded. "We'll do it," he said. Not a question, a decision. Buddy shifted closer, shoulder brushing Ethan's leg, as if he had heard his name spoken in a language that mattered. Training began at a base facility set back from concrete and noise, bordered by trees that held sound the way the mountains did. Ethan wore his uniform again, green digital camouflage, sleeves rolled, boots scuffed honest. The fit grounded him. Buddy worked on a loose leash at first, then without it, posture neutral, tail low, and steady. He did not rush. He assessed. He waited. Evaluators watched closely. They noted how Buddy chose proximity without clinging, how Ethan issued fewer commands than expected, trusting pauses as much as movement. When paired with a young operator who hadn't slept well in weeks, Buddy settled beside him and stayed. The man's shoulders lowered, breathing slowed. No orders were given, no praise demanded. Presence did the work. Sarah visited before Ethan's departure, arriving in her ranger green jacket dusted with spring grit. She looked thinner in the way momentum makes people lean, not in the way fear does. Her investigation into illegal handlers had widened after the arrest. Doors that had been locked opened when someone knocked long enough. She stood on the porch and took in the scene. Ethan packing, Buddy waiting patiently, the mountains loosening their hold. "You're doing the right thing," she said. Not encouragement, recognition. They spoke easily about seasons and classrooms and the patience mountains teach. When she left, she waved once, clean and unambiguous. Weeks passed. Buddy certified, without spectacle. He learned routes and signals, but more importantly, he learned restraint. Ethan learned, too, how to stay when the urge to pull back rose, how to answer memory with motion rather than avoidance. Sleep returned in fragments, then in hours. When memories surfaced, they did not flatten him. He had a method now. He had a partner who stayed. On a clear morning near the end of spring, Ethan and Buddy stood at the edge of the training grounds. Forest stretched ahead, green shadow layered with birdsong. Ethan adjusted his gear with smooth familiarity. Buddy waited at his side, weight even, ears attentive. There was no leash between them, only understanding refined by work. Ethan took a breath and stepped off the pavement into the trees. Buddy moved with him, stride matching, neither leading nor following. They disappeared together, not as a man rescued by a dog, or a dog rescued by a man, but as a unit composed and capable. Ethan did not look back. He didn't need to. Where spring begins, forward is enough. This story is not really about a soldier, a woman, or a dog. It is about a moment, the moment when someone chooses not to walk away. In the mountains, winter decides quickly who is worth saving. In life, we often do the same. We label things too broken, too risky, too late. We leave people behind because stopping feels dangerous, because helping costs time, strength, or comfort. But sometimes all it takes to change a life is one person who refuses to keep walking. A wounded dog did not become a hero because he was trained. He became a hero because someone believed he still mattered. A soldier did not heal because the past disappeared. He healed because he chose to stay present instead of obeying fear one more time. And a woman did not survive the storm because she was strong alone, but because someone noticed her when the world did not. In our daily lives, we face smaller storms, but the choices are just as real. A friend who is struggling, a family member who feels forgotten, an animal, a neighbor, a stranger who needs help. We don't need to be heroes. We just need to stop, see, and stay. Because no one heals alone, and no one is beyond purpose just because the world decided they were inconvenient.